If you want to harm an enemy, strike so hard that they will never dare to seek revenge. People quickly forget the death of their fathers, but they never forget the confiscation of their possessions. You have to appear good, but you don't have to be good, because people look at the result. If you win, all the tricks you used are considered honorable and applauded. These words are not a movie quote, nor a manifesto of a criminal organization. These words were written down 500 years ago in the heart of Italy by an ordinary Florentine civil servant under the flickering candlelight. The book is titled About Principalities, but history will know him simply as the Prince. When he wrote this book, the place called Italy was not yet a country. The unified Italy we know today did not yet exist. The peninsula was divided into fragmented city-states. Florence, Milan, Venice, Naples, the papacy, each was a small but wealthy machine with its own tax system, its own bank, its own army charter. For centuries, they called this book the Devil's Book. They banned it, they burned it in town squares, because the book spoke not of the facade of power adorned with religious sermons and moral fables, but of the bloody ledger hidden in the back room. Why was he declared the devil's shadow on earth by the Catholic Church? And most importantly, what did this man describe in this thin book that has become the go-to book for kings, dictators, and politicians for 500 years? He didn't invent these rules at a desk. He wrote this book in the midst of that chaos where friend turned foe, money bought loyalty, and unarmed prophets were burned alive. Today's guest in our series of Architects of the Mind is Niccolò Machiavelli. If you're ready, let's begin. In the very beginning of the book, in a dedication letter to Lorenzo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence at the time, he summarized his position with the metaphor of mountains and plains. Just as painters climb mountains to paint plains, and plains to paint mountains, to understand the people, one must be a prince, and to understand a prince, one must be one of the people. I am not a prince, says Machiavelli. I am in the plains, and looking down from the plain, I see that dirty mechanism, those bloody gears on the hill, better than you do. The prince doesn't begin like a manifesto, it begins like a medical treatise. In the very first pages, Machiavelli asks the most fundamental question of politics. What kind of state are we dealing with? Because, according to him, not all states are the same. Just as a doctor must diagnose the illness before treating the patient, a leader must correctly define the structure of his state before governing it. Wrong diagnosis means wrong treatment. Machiavelli makes the following classification. States are either republics, meaning they are governed through representatives of the people, or principalities, meaning they are governed by the will of a single person. Principalities are either hereditary, meaning power passes from father to son through blood, or they are new, meaning someone has seized power by force or chance. The practical consequence of this distinction is that hereditary power is easier to maintain, because human nature fears change. The people prefer the master they know. There is no reason to question it, because everyone is born into this system. But if the new prince establishes a new order, everything is different. The new administration comes at a price. The tax system changes, privileges shift. The old powerful become powerless. The losers of the old order seek opportunities for revenge. This is why a large part of the prince focuses on the problems of the new prince. Because innovation is the most dangerous terrain of politics, and Machiavelli learned this firsthand. The date is June 19, 1498. The Grand Council of the Florentine Republic was about to appoint someone to one of the most critical bureaucratic positions in the state, the second chancellorship. Florence was a republic on paper. There was no king. Theoretically, the people governed themselves, but in practice, the city was run by wealthy merchant families and bankers.
These families elected an executive council called the Sonura, and this council governed the city. The second chancellor was the bureaucratic backbone of this administration. He handled correspondence, compiled reports, coordinated embassies, and most importantly, served the council that oversaw war and intelligence affairs. The candidate was a 29-year-old man, not wealthy, not from a noble family, frail but with a sharp gaze. This appointment was no ordinary civil service position. From that day forward, Machiavelli was the memory and black box of the state. His desk was filled daily with spy reports from all over Tuscany, demands for money from commanders, and diplomatic codes. Machiavelli didn't leave that desk for 14 years, and he saw that the apparatus called the state was not the glorious, honorable, and moral structure it appeared from the outside. On the contrary, when viewed from the inside, it was a creaking, cumbersome machine full of lies, bribery, delays, cowardice, and incompetence. Every line he would write in his book is a technical and disimpassioned analysis of thousands of documents he read at that desk. However, only a month before sitting at that desk, Machiavelli had witnessed the fundamental law of physics in politics. The protagonist of the story, Girolamo Savonarola, was a Dominican friar. The Dominican order was one of the most intellectual and toughest branches of the Catholic Church, and it had effectively ruled Florence for 4 years. But his rule was not conventional. He had neither an army, nor a police, nor an official constitutional authority. Savonarola's power rested entirely on 3 things. The people relied on faith, the power of words, and the promise of moral reform. Savonarola delivered fiery sermons from the pulpit, accusing bankers of usury, the nobility of corruption, and the common people of sinfulness. He organized ceremonies in Florence called the Fire of Vanity, where people threw their luxury goods, mirrors, expensive fabrics, and even musical instruments into giant bonfires erected in the squares. For 4 years, Florence was ruled by this man's word. The people called him a prophet. However, in 1498, the political tide turned. Pope Alexander VI sent an ultimatum from Rome to Florence: either silence this man, or I will excommunicate the entire city and impose an economic embargo. Excommunication was a death sentence at that time. No one could trade with an excommunicated city. Florence was a trading city. Its economy was based on banking and exports. When the Pope's threat landed, the commercial interests of the Florentine people trumped their faith. Merchants feared losing money, and the devout populace, who yesterday had called the man a prophet, abandoned him to be lynched in Piazza della Soria. Savonarola was arrested, and he had no armed force loyal to him to protect him from that angry mob. For 4 years, he had led thousands of people, but he hadn't organized a single armed guard from those thousands. He only had prayer, and nature was powerless against swords. Savonarola was hanged in the square that day. His body was cremated. His ashes were scattered into the Arno River. Machiavelli was in that square that day. He watched the cremation from among the crowd, and there, amidst the smoke and ashes, Machiavelli understood the most fundamental physical law of politics. He wrote this law in his book, "All unarmed prophets perish. Those who are armed survive." In fact, Machiavelli drew a deeper lesson from this event. In his book, he described the sociological barrier that every politician, every pioneer of change encounters. It should not be forgotten that there is nothing more difficult, more doubtful of success, and more dangerous to manage than bringing about a new order. Because the reformers' enemies are those who benefit from the old order, and they are very passionate, very aggressive in protecting their interests. Those who will benefit from the new order are only lukewarm and reluctant supporters, because human nature is skeptical. It does not fully believe in something new that it has not seen with its own eyes, touched with its own hands, or put in its pocket. The mechanism is this. Change always creates losers and winners. The losers are certain. They have already lost and are angry. The winners are uncertain. They have not yet won and are cautious. Anger is always a stronger motivator than caution, and when the reformer is alone, the only thing that will keep him afloat is brute force. After the ashes in the square had cooled, Machiavelli returned to his table and found his second major crisis before him, the Pisa problem. Pisa was a strategic port west of Florence, its gateway to the sea. In 1494, Florence had declared its independence. This was unacceptable to Florence, because without Pisa they could not conduct maritime trade. Florence went to war to reclaim Pisa, but there was a problem. Florence was a merchant republic. Its citizens were wealthy.
A leader who doesn't touch the pockets of the people is the most beloved leader in the long run. Fear or love? This is the most famous question in the book The Prince. Machiavelli asks, can a prince be both feared and loved? Ideally, the answer is yes, but in practice this is very difficult, and if you have to choose one, choose to be feared. Machiavelli's definition of human nature is this: people are ungrateful, fickle, manipulative, avoid danger, and addicted to profit. They are with you as long as you do them good, but when danger knocks, they all turn their backs and flee. Love is dependent on self-interest. When the benefit ends, so does love. Fear, on the other hand, depends on the deterrent effect of punishment. As long as the threat of punishment persists, so does obedience. Love is like a thread. People break that thread when their own interests are at stake. Fear is like a chain. It is difficult to break, but it has a critical limit. Be feared, but never be hated. Fear produces obedience. Hatred produces rebellion. When do people hate? Machiavelli's answer is, do not touch the property and women of your citizens. People get used to political oppression over time, but never to economic aggression. Machiavelli observes that people forget the murder of their fathers more quickly than being deprived of their inheritance. You can shed blood, but you cannot plunder. Property is the insurance of power. Machiavelli also emphasized the importance of building prestige. A prince does not only have to be powerful, he also has to appear powerful, because people recognize the leader from afar and believe what they see. Machiavelli's advice is not to say, do great things, make remarkable decisions, stand out in religious ceremonies, appear just, be careful, but to appear. Because the prince doesn't have to be truly pious, but he has to appear so. The people don't know what the leader really is. They can only look at the appearance. Machiavelli, in exile, wrote a comedy. La Mandragola, or Mandrake, is one of the most famous comedies in Italian literature. Everyone in the play is immoral. The young lover lies. The priest manipulates religion for bribes. The husband is deceived because he is a fool. In this play, Machiavelli was arguing that not only the princes, but society itself is corrupt. You are what you are, and those who rule you are the same. Generally, we only know Machiavelli from his book, The Prince. We know him as a guide to dictatorship. This is an incomplete picture. Machiavelli, in exile, began secretly entering Florence after 1515. In a place called the Rucella Gardens, he secretly indoctrinated young people with political ideas. He gave lectures. Here, he discussed not the prince, but the book Discorsi sopra la prima decadi Titus Livio, which is an analysis of Roman history written by the Roman historian Titus Livius. Here, Machiavelli dropped his mask. He was actually a staunch Republican. He explained to the young people that a prince, or one-man rule, is an emergency remedy to establish a state or save it from a crisis. But for the state to survive for a long time, a republic is essential. Dictatorship is a medicine. If the dose is distributed, it heals. If taken continuously, it poisons. Machiavelli also discussed the role of religion. According to him,
Religion is a tool for controlling the masses in politics. In Latin, decum regni, a tool of power. He described the legendary Roman king Numa Pompilius. Numa wanted to bring the wild Roman people to conform to new laws. He invented a lie. He said, "I go to the forest at night. There I meet a water nymph. These laws are the commands of the gods." The people believed him, because they could object to Numa, but they could not object to the gods. Here, Machiavelli's advice is this: appear pious, participate in religious ceremonies at the forefront, but don't let religion bind you. Use religion as a cement that holds the people together. In 1520, the Medici family partially pardoned Machiavelli. They gave him the task of writing the official history of Florence. Years later, Machiavelli was back in the palace corridors, but the scene he witnessed worried him. The Medici leaders who ruled Florence and the Vatican had surrounded themselves with an echo chamber. They were surrounded by sycophants who only told them what they wanted to hear. Especially Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, who would later become Pope Clement VII. He did not see the approaching dangers. Machiavelli wrote in his book, The Prince, "There are 3 types of intelligence in the world. The first understands everything spontaneously. The second understands the truth when someone else explains it. The third neither understands itself nor listens to others. The third type ruins the state." The Medicis were drifting towards the third category. They ostracized those who warned them, saying, "You are too pessimistic." Machiavelli's solution was this: the prince should establish a council of chosen wise men. "The harsher the truth you tell me, the more I will reward you. But if you lie, I will take your head." The Medicis did not do this. In 1527, the catastrophe Machiavelli warned about occurred. The army of the Roman German Emperor Charles Quint invaded Italy. It was largely composed of German mercenaries, many of whom were Protestants and viewed the Pope as the Antichrist. They had not received their wages for months. They were hungry, angry, and thirsty. On the morning of May 6, 1527, this army reached the gates of Rome. They breached the walls in a matter of hours. Pope Clement VII escaped at the last moment by fleeing to Castel Sant'Angelo, but the city was left defenseless. Historians called that day the Sacco di Roma, the sack of Rome. For a week, Rome was hell. Thousands of civilians were massacred. Churches were looted. Priceless works of the Renaissance were destroyed. The heart of Western civilization was plunged into darkness in a single day due to the unpreparedness foreseen by Machiavelli. In a letter to his friend Francesco Guicciardini, Machiavelli wrote, "I love my soul, but I love my country more than my soul." When news of the sack of Rome reached Florence, the people revolted. They expelled the Medici and re-established the Republic. This news ignited a last glimmer of hope in Machiavelli. He thought, "My time has come again. They will make me general secretary once more." Dragging his old and weary body, he went to the Great Council. He ran for general secretary, but the people's memory was merciless. The new generation of young Republicans in the council sought him differently. For them, Machiavelli was an old man who had spent years trying to curry favor with the Medici, giving them lessons of tyranny. A vote was held. Machiavelli lost overwhelmingly. Even the young men he had trained did not vote for him. His own book had ended his career and reputation. Just weeks after this final blow, on June 21, 1527, Machiavelli died of severe stomach pains. He was quietly buried in Santa Croce Church. How did the Prince book end? By saying, "Crush the people," as everyone thought? No. The final chapter completely reverses the cold tone of the previous 25 chapters. Machiavelli removes that cold analyst mask. He emerges as a fervent patriot. The chapter's title is a call to liberate Italy from the hands of barbarians. Italy is leaderless, lawless, oppressed, and fragmented. Is there no leader who will drive out these barbarians and unite us? Machiavelli wrote those diabolical rules to create a strong state that would unite his fragmented country. If necessary, send your soul to hell, but save your country. 5 years after Machiavelli's death, in 1532, his book, The Prince, was published. The Catholic Church added it to its list of banned books. Machiavelli was declared the devil's messenger, but the ban only increased his appeal. King Henry VIII of England, King Henry IV of France, and Napoleon publicly cursed Machiavelli, but they all secretly kept the book by their bedside, because Machiavelli had written a manual for using power. Why are we still talking about this Florentine official 500 years later? Because Machiavelli didn't lie. He showed us not the imaginary world we should have, but the dirty, bloody workings of the world. Machiavelli wasn't a devil. He was just a mirror, and we are angry at him because we are afraid of the self-serving, cowardly, power-hungry face we see when we look in the mirror. Until next time in our series on the architects of the mind, goodbye for now.